Yesterday we were just finishing this up, and we kind of rushed through some of these things, and I want to take just a few minutes to talk a little bit more about them. But we did say that, the majority of organizations in the world have mission statements, and I suspect you have one. And I kind of provided a little bit of assessment in terms of, I think, how mission statements typically emerge. We're required to do them, and so we kind of follow the rules, and we submit something which reflects what it is we think we want to do, especially if we're beginning an organization, and what we think it might look like if in fact we were successful. But oftentimes it doesn't reflect the realities of what we're best at, and oftentimes after 5 or 10 years in doing something, we realize that really what our real strengths are basically a little bit different than what we imagined they might be as we were beginning an organization. And so we kind of recalibrate, and we begin to rebrand ourselves in the light of something that is a little bit more consistent with reality. But mission statements, I think, need to be evaluated, especially on a fairly regular basis, only by virtue of the fact that things change. And we obviously are living in a changing world. So, typically in organizations that I work with, I don't normally ask them for a mission statement, because I've done that before, and then basically they'll kind of look at the mission statement and say, well, we don't do that, and we kind of don't do that, and this is really not important to us. And I'm thinking, well, if this is your mission statement and it's not that important, and if you don't do it, then maybe we ought to look at your mission or your vision for what it is that you feel God's called you to do. And so rather than ask them anymore, I just kind of talk about vision to begin with. And vision is really a great thing. I was thinking this morning as I was preparing for our time together, and I started writing down the names of people that really had an impact on my life. I've had the joy of being able to be surrounded by a lot of visionaries. When I was 15 years old, I went to work at this camp. I told you a little bit about it yesterday. But the people that led this organization were really visionaries. They just never thought that anything was out of the range of possibility with the power of God, and they lived that way. They practiced that way. They had unbelievable faith and incomparable trust. And as a 15-year-old, I'm just kind of watching all of this. I'm thinking, this is just incredible. And it kind of, caused me to think beyond what was normal and what was actual to what it is that could be. And so I had the opportunity of being able to know those people, and they really did have an impact in my life and being able to shape what it is that I think I am becoming as a servant of the Lord. And then, later in life, I got to meet other people. Bill Bright was one of the very special people in my life that really caused me to think in terms that were far beyond, what was realistic. Bill in 1978, some of you have heard the story, but in 1978 he was in a meeting at Campus Crusade for Christ, and it was kind of a business meeting, and some of you are Campus Crusade folks and have been a part of that ministry perhaps over the years. But it was a business meeting. All the leadership of Campus Crusade were there, and they were kind of laying out their plans for that particular year and what the costs were going to be. And they're trying to, measure the budget and assess, well, what it is we're going to spend money on and how we're going to allocate our resources and so forth. And it was an all-day meeting. It was long, and it was, the kind of meeting that you just kind of sit around in and you kind of get engaged, but you're really not kind of engaged at another level, because if they're not talking about you and what it is that you're doing, you're listening, but you may not have the same level of interest. Until finally at the end of the meeting, someone asked Bill if he had anything that he wanted to say. And Bill hadn't said too much the entire day, but at the end of the day he stands up and he says, I want to make sure that 4.5 billion people have the opportunity of seeing the Jesus film by the year 2000. You can imagine, the response. Basically the response was just total silence. Nobody was saying anything. And people were kind of looking around, and then they finally looked over to one corner of the room where there were a group of bean counters. The bean counters, the people that are the accountants, the finance offices, the people that are kind of making the plans and creating the model for that particular year. And they're starting to whisper among themselves. And you could kind of see them nodding and looking at each other. And then finally someone timidly raises their hand and says, Bill, you mentioned a word when you were talking about, people. And what was that word again? It was 4.5 what? And he said billion. And they said, with a B? And he says, yes, with a B. Well, they kind of huddle up again, and you can kind of hear the whispering and the talking. And then finally, another person timidly raises his hand and says, you know, the way we calculate that, Bill, that's everybody on planet Earth. And Bill says, yeah, that's pretty much the way I calculate it as well. And so they begin to huddle up again and look at each other and look at the papers in front of them. And finally, someone else kind of raises their hand and says, well, Bill, do you have any idea what that will cost? And Bill says, you know, I really don't have the foggiest idea. And then somebody else just blurted out, do you care, Bill? And he says, no, I really don't care how much it costs. This is what we're going to do. And, you know, that was the largest initiative ever launched by Campus Crusade for Christ at that particular time. And it essentially, millions and hundreds of millions of dollars was raised in order to be able to accomplish that objective. They had 22 years to do it. It was 1978, and so they had 22 years to do it. They created an incredible strategic plan that basically says, okay, we're going to do this in 1979, we're going to do this in 1980, we're going to do this in 1981 and 82 and 83 and 84 and 85. By the time we were getting up to 1998, 1999, and the year 2000, we're now translating it into the dialects of people in places around the world where only 300 or 400 people even spoke the dialect. But what was really interesting, and I think there's a core principle here to keep in mind as you're thinking about the work of development, your work of development, is that when you're talking to people about your organization, lead with your vision and not with your need. Lead with your vision and not with your need. You see, the problem with needs is we all have them. I have needs and you have needs, and so oftentimes interactions with people that are associated with your organization, you're sitting down and here's a potential donor, and so you're really anxious to kind of share with them what it is that you're doing and to seek their engagement. And so you talk about your needs. Here's where it is we are. Here's where it is we're going. This is what it is we need. And people listen to you politely. And then perhaps after they're finished or after you're finished, they say, well, you know, let me just take a few minutes to tell you about my needs. And they begin to talking about your needs. And all of a sudden there's this contest going on because my needs need to out-trump your needs in order for something to happen. And yeah, oftentimes it doesn't happen. But there's something incredibly compelling about a vision. And as we raise money, and I was involved in helping to raise money for that project over the years, and as we talked to people, we rarely talked about the need. I mean, in terms of the monetary need. We talked about the vision and the need for that vision to become reality because people needed to hear the gospel of Christ. People needed to hear it. And basically people just generously, you know, became engaged in the process in a variety of different ways, not just in giving, but in other ways, in helping that to become reality. So lead with your vision and not with your need. You know, Bill once said something to me that I thought was very, very interesting. He looked at me one day and he said, Jerry, he says, never have a vision so small that God doesn't have to show up. Never have a vision so small that God doesn't have to show up. And I think many times we have visions that are just, you know, we kind of think, well, we could do this, and we could do this, and we could do this, and maybe you could do it. But you really want a vision that God's going to have to be involved if it's going to become reality. Never have a vision so small that God doesn't have to show up. And oftentimes when people come back having done their homework, we listen to their vision statements. And we all kind of get amazed by the vision statements. But, you know, almost invariably, as I'm talking to a group of people and as they share their vision statement, I'll look at them, and not facetiously, but with a sense of, because I know what it is they're explaining to me is something that they know they can do. And it, you know, basically it's going to be difficult, and it's going to be hard, and it may be challenging, but I just look at them and say, you know, your vision's not big enough. You need to work on that. Well, their vision in their eyes is the biggest thing they've ever thought of, but it's not big enough. And I think we need to raise up a generation of people that basically believe in the impossible, that are trusting God to do things that just are so outside the box that, you know, if it's going to happen, God needs to show up. And I'm not suggesting that we don't have a plan, because we have to have a plan in order to do that. And so this morning, as I was writing a blog issue, I said, well, you know, there were people that had a part in my life at this point and at this point. And then I said, and here's a group of people that if you really want to have somebody to pray for, here's a group of people that have a big vision. And I listed some names of people, some of which are in this room, of saying, you know, pray for these people because they have a vision. an incredible vision. And if God would bless their vision, their world might change for the glory of God. And it's all about the glory of God. It's not about us. We're just kind of the bit players in a huge drama that's taking place in the world. But we have our part. It's by faith that so many great things that are talked about in Hebrews chapter 11 were accomplished. In fact, all of them were accomplished by faith. And some of them never saw them come to reality. And some paid the ultimate price for what it is that they were called of God to do. But nonetheless, they did it, and they did it faithfully, and God worked. And we're all here because of their faithfulness. And now it's our turn to lead the way for another generation so that they might have the same opportunities that we've had. So vision, I want you to articulate it, and then, we kind of need to sit down and we need to determine how we're going to do it. And we're going to use a plan this week, and one of the things that I think makes this training a little bit different than perhaps other things that you may have been involved in is that you're going to walk away with some specifics, not just with a lot of good ideas and say, well, this could work, and I think we might be able to do this. But I want you to leave with saying, I'm going to do this week, next week, and so forth. And we'll try to give you tools that will enable you to quantify objectives so that you can cross them off when you're done so that you're making progress to the ultimate goal to which you've committed yourself. And the planning process that we're going to be talking about tomorrow, I think is going to be very, very helpful, very, very practical, not just in terms of your ministry, but also in terms of the other life activities in which you're involved, including your family, your church, and other organizations of which you're a part. The developmental plan, that's reserved for Wednesday. Wednesday morning, we're going to take out our calculators. We're going to start talking, in very, very specific terms, and you will know how many people you need to be on your database, in order to achieve the goals that you have, that vision that you have. You're going to need to know, and you will know specifically how many donors in various classifications that you need to be recruiting. We're going to try to adapt a little bit of that into the context of the 21st century philanthropy, as I was talking about yesterday, in the philanthropic institutions, how we might be able to accommodate so many various aspects of what it is that we need to do in order to accomplish our goals. But that's a great model. It kind of pulls things together. It allows people to kind of think, okay, these 4 things, you could have 1 and you could not be successful. You could have 2, mission and vision, and not be successful. You could have 3, mission, vision, and strategic plan and not be successful. I mean, all 4 are absolutely essential to be able to build the kind of organization that's going to be sustainable and make an impact in the lives of people in the future. Now, we gave you the definition of development yesterday. Let's see if you can fill in the blanks. Development represents the things that we do to build rational, all right, relationships with others. So it's all about relationships. It has nothing to, very little to do with money, very little to do with what we have to say. But to the degree that we're successful in building relationships, the defining characteristic of which is reciprocal. They're reciprocal. Both parties benefit from the relationship, and if both parties don't benefit, you don't have a relationship, you have an arrangement. Okay. Well, you're doing pretty good. All right, you did listen yesterday. Some of you are still scratching your head a little bit by saying, don't ask me a question at this hour in the morning. I'm not ready. But you're doing really well. Thank you. Okay, so that's what development is all about. But yet, let me give you 6 things that basically involve, or at least fall under the umbrella of what it is that we call development. Okay, so there are 6 areas of development, and if you're a development officer or if you have a position within your organization as a developmental administrator, you have a degree of responsibility in addressing each of these broad 6 areas. So it's not just about fundraising, which oftentimes it's looked at. People say you're a development officer, and their immediate conclusion is, oh, well, you're a fundraiser. Well, that's one of the things that I'm involved in, but there are 5 other things that I'm involved in that are equally as important to being able to build a stable organization to which I'm committed to serve. So here's the first one, obviously fundraising. So we all know about fundraising. We need to raise money. Where we can talk all we want, but at the end of the day, obviously, money is a factor that prevents us or doesn't enable us to be able to do what it is that we want to do. But it's not the answer, as we pointed out yesterday. Oftentimes, the things between good and excellence don't cost anything. And I think, right now we're finding people that are being much more creative because we thought that if we had all of this money, we would be able to do this, but now that all that money's not available, so they're kind of thinking of more creative ways to be able to accomplish the same objectives. The other 5 areas. So we have fundraising, recruitment, retention. Those are 2 important things that we're involved in. All of us are involved in organizations. We recruit people to support us. We recruit donors. We recruit volunteers. We recruit staff members. So we want to recruit people. We want to get them engaged in what it is that we're doing and make them a part of our team in whatever way they can contribute to the overall picture of what it is that we're seeking to accomplish. And then we want to retain them. In other words, you know, there's as much work in retaining and sustaining a relationship as there is in securing it, as we pointed out perhaps a little bit yesterday, and we're going to really develop that a little bit this afternoon or later today. So we want to be involved in recruitment and retention. And by the way, the opposite of retention is attrition. Okay? So let's say that you get a number, let's say 517 donors this year, and then if I were to ask you the question of those 517 that gave to you this year or last year, how many of them gave again this year? In other words, you're tracking, I mean, how many of them did we retain? How many of our volunteers did we retain? So you're constantly measuring, and that's a very important exercise, to constantly be measuring your retention percentage. Because if you have attrition of 8% or more, you have a blinking yellow light or a blinking red light saying, you know, you need to address this, you need to address this, you need to address this. Because, you know, it's true that the average satisfied customer shares his satisfaction with about 5 or 6 people, but the average dissatisfied customer shares his dissatisfaction with about 15. And so the odds are against you, you know, if you continue to fail to deliver in ways that people anticipate and expect you to deliver, then the realities are you're going to face the consequences with attrition that eventually is going to impact the whole viability of your entire organization. So it really needs to be focused on, and you need to be tracking those things because those are little indicators of how well you're doing and what it is that you might need to do to improve yourself. The third area is public relations. You see, people know about your organizations, and some people know a lot about your organizations, and other people don't know much about your organization. And there are some people that know about your organization, they don't know much, and in fact, they've got it totally confused. They think you're a cult, they think you're some kind of a radical person that's out doing radical things, and I hope at least at one level we are kind of doing radical things, but in a positive spiritual way that's making a spiritual kingdom impact. But the whole point is that most people don't understand. And we kind of live with that. I mean, people say, well, I was talking to somebody the other day, and this is what they think about your organization. I say, well, that's really, you know, that's not who we are, and so forth. But you say, well, you know, I guess that's the way it is, and we kind of shrug our shoulders. But the realities are we need to shape the message of what we want people to know and understand about our organization and make sure that we deliver it in ways that would cause them, as best as is possible, for them to develop the right conclusions about who it is we are and what it is we're all about. You see, there's proactive public relations and there's reactive public relations. Reactive public relations means that every time somebody says something, we just stop and we defend ourselves and we kind of act upon it. And we may react by doing something that is probably totally out of character of our organization. You know, we say something, and all of a sudden now we're becoming a sounding board and a place where people are going to start debating things and so forth. And you really don't want that to happen. But reaction is always dangerous in any form of administrative management when we totally react and are not proactive. Proactive says this is who we are, this is what we do, this is how we do it, and this is the message that we really want to communicate to people. Public relations, very, very important. We all have an image, and basically we're responsible for guarding it, at least in the developmental concepts or the developmental arena. The fourth area, this is one that everybody gets excited about. They almost get giddy about it when I talk about it because it's the thing that they love most about development. Database management. Oh, now see how excited you are about that. 3 of you are yawning and 1 just fell asleep. You know, database management is just not, terribly exciting, is it? But the realities are you need to maintain data on the people that you're working with. It's clients, it's donors, it's friends, it's interested people, people who care about you, people who have demonstrated an interest, maybe they're clients or alumni and whatever. And so you need to maintain that data. It needs to be in a place where you can manage it. So you put it into a database program, and there are lots of good programs available that will enable you to do research and sorts and reports that basically can help measure your success and what it is you're doing. And that whole field has changed immensely in the 40 years I've been in development. In 1970, when I started in the developmental process, we didn't even know what a computer was. In fact, our database was 3x5 cards in a shoebox. And some of you are saying, has something changed? I mean, that's like the way we're doing it. We have a lot of 3x5 cards in a shoebox. But we had 3x5 cards in a shoebox, and they were all alphabetized, so we had T's, so pick up a card, and here's a 3x5 card, and it says Twombly on it, and on the back of it is all kind of information that people put, that met with the Twombleys, and things that the Twombleys had done, gifts that they had made, when they were made, what they were designated for, and so forth. And so when we were going out to make a call, we just grabbed the cards of the people that we were going to be talking to, and we had enough information to be able to engage into meaningful conversation, and then we'd write down the update information so the next person that might see them would be aware of the fact of what it is that had been done. Well, now it's all possible for us. We have, technologies that are inexpensive and tools that are available, that will enable us to do a whole lot better job in just managing those relationships that we have of people that have demonstrated an interest in our organization. And we'll talk more about that a little bit later on. So database management is real important. Strategic planning is the fifth area. See, strategic planning is basically saying, okay, here's where we are, here's where we're going, here are the steps that we're taking, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 this year, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 next year, and so forth, and we're going to do that. It's quantifiable, it's measurable. If it's not quantifiable, it's not measurable, you don't have a plan, what you have is probably just a great idea. And so strategic planning is important. We're going to talk a lot about that. And then the last area is organization. And this is a topic that I really love to talk about. We're going to touch upon it more on the last day, and it's really unfortunate it has to wait until then, and then we're usually left with a very little time to kind of really develop the idea. But it's one of the favorite topics that I have, because most of you, are like one-man shops. And you're the director, you're the development director, you're the recruitment director, you're the, basically, whatever someone didn't know what to do and to whom to give it, they dump it on the office or the development officer. Okay, you just need to deal with this. And we've developed just a really neat, simple organizational model that really, really works. And if you manage it well, I'm absolutely convinced that all of you can do absolutely everything that I'm saying that you should be doing by the end of this session, and you can do it without having to build relationships with maybe more than 8 or 10 people. And you can have a very comprehensive, an extremely successful, and an incredibly wonderful, productive development department, and you're not going to die in the process. See, the beaches of development are strewn with the bodies of development directors, who basically quit because they couldn't do it. They just burned out in the process. The average tenure in our generation or in our profession in America is 1.8 years. In other words, they stay, they come in enthusiastic, they come in loving the organization, they're incredibly competent, they're incredibly capable, they know exactly, everything that you do, and they believe in it, and that the reason why they said yes to your invitation to be their development director was because they knew you were, a passionate, devoted supporter of this organization. So there's nothing wrong with the people, it's just that they basically don't know how to go about the process, and they try to do everything themselves, and in the process of doing that, they burn out, and everything is lost, and we've lost them for our organizations in the future, and that's really unfortunate, and it's not necessary. So if there's any hope in this little presentation, just be assured of the fact that I'm going to show you a model that's going to enable you to get everything done that I'm suggesting needs to be done. It can be done efficiently, effectively, and it's not going to cost hardly anything, if anything at all, and it's going to alleviate a lot of the pain that you're having to deal with on a day-to-day basis, and you're going to find yourself free to be able to do the kinds of things that you need to as a director to think about and really growing the ministry and expanding it for the glory of God. Does that sound encouraging to you? I mean, you can do it. It's really not hard to do. And it's actually, when you see how simple it is, you're going to say, well, golly, I'm not sure that, why didn't we think of that? And it's not like it's like profound. Nothing I say is profound because I'm not that smart. So just understand that this is something that we all can do, okay? Now, so those are the 6 areas of development: fundraising, recruitment, retention, public relations, database management, strategic planning, and organization. And you see, one is dependent upon the other. If you do a really bad job in retention, then you're not going to have as much impact in the fundraising arena. And most of you would agree with that. I mean, here you are losing, 30% of your students every year. You're losing 30% of your volunteers every year. I mean, I talk to some of those people, and they say you don't really have your act together. And so, yes, I am interested in what it is you do, but no, thank you. I'm not sure I want to invest in it. In the same way with public relations, if people have the wrong impression of who it is you are and what it is you're trying to do, despite the fact that you may have a vision, but they haven't figured it out yet, and basically their perception of you is not accurate to begin with, then you can be assured of the fact that they're not going to generously support you. The same way with database management. If you go to someone who is a major donor who gave you $1 million a year for the last 5 years, and you ask him if he might want to consider a gift, and he says, well, I have been doing that for 5 years, $1 million a year. Oh, really? Is that you that's been doing that? That really doesn't build real positive relationships. And obviously that's an absurd remark at one level, but at another level that happens all the time. That someone does something, they're actively involved, and someone comes to them who doesn't know that, or who doesn't know a lot of other things about that particular individual, approaches them only to find out that, they are a bit offended by the fact that you didn't know what it is that they were doing. And so, that's really, really important, and that's where database management comes in. Strategic plan, if you don't have a plan, the typical donor who has the potential of really helping you is probably going to say something to the effect that, well, when you get your act together, come back and talk to me about it. But until you have your act together, I'm just going to kind of sit on the sidelines and see what happens. You see, all of those things, and if you have no organization whatsoever, you know what that's going to mean. So the point is that all of these things kind of go together in order to be able to have a comprehensive, successful, sustainable development effort that basically engages people who've committed themselves over the long time to be partners with you in fulfilling the vision to which you have. So those 6 things are really pretty important. Right now I want to talk to you about the relational continuum. And I talked about this in a session yesterday, and some of you heard it yesterday, so it's going to be just a great review. And for those of you that haven't seen it yet, it's part of the coloring book. It's the relational continuum, which you have in the booklet that I gave you. It's kind of just a line. It looks like this. Okay, this is the diagram that I want to explain to you. Now I think I used this illustration yesterday, but I talk to people. I get asked to come to speak at conferences and go to organizations and talk to them about development. Sometimes they'll have me talk to their development team. Sometimes their board, administration, or whatever. And oftentimes people will pick me up at the airport, and it's always good to come out of the airport and see a sign with your name on it. You're kind of, oh, yes, thank you. You don't have to worry about how to get there. And usually it's the president of the organization or the development director or someone. And so we're driving in the car to the place where we're going to be meeting, and he says, this development stuff, man, I tell you, we just don't get it. This is really tough. I mean, this is really, really hard stuff. I mean, it doesn't get much harder than this. And we do a lot of things really well, but we just don't do well here. And he keeps on telling me this is really hard stuff, and this is really difficult, and I don't know where you find somebody that can do this stuff, but boy, I tell you, we're looking, and we've been looking hard for years, and actually for the last 35 years, and we still haven't found anyone. And I listened to that, and I've heard so many stories over the years, and finally I just kind of look at them and says, this is easy. This is like the easiest thing in the world to do. And he says, well, it may be easy for you. I said, no. Not only is it easy, but you have experience. And he says, I don't have any experience in this. I have a PhD in whatever, but I have no experience whatsoever. I mean, I am the exception to the rule, possibly, at least to the people that you contact, but I'm not that person. I have never had any experience in doing this. And I says, you have. He says, what do you mean I have? You don't, I'm just telling you I've never had any experience. I says, you have lots of experience. And he says, well, why would you say that? I says, have you ever fallen in love? He says, well, yeah. I said, then you have experience. Because the greatest analogy of development is falling in love. And it's something that all of us have done. We all have fallen in love. And if you can understand what it is that happened between the time you first met your spouse for the first time and you never had seen her before on the planet until that one moment, until the time you stood in front of a pastor and you looked longingly into her eyes and you said, for richer, for poorer, for better, for worse, in sickness and in health until death do us part. If you can figure out what happened between here and here, then you really understand development. It's just replicating a process that you're very familiar with and you have experience in doing it. And it really, honestly, is not that difficult. So what I want to do is I want to kind of walk you through that process. Now, we already made some statements yesterday that I want to just kind of validate here because it really does come into this context or this discussion. I said in the context of relationships, it's emotion that brings us together. You see, you're drawn together emotionally, right? When you fall in love, the first reaction that you have when you see this person for the first time is a little bit different than the reactions that you had in other situations when you met other people that basically were, may have looked and sounded like her, but it didn't have the same kind of impact on your soul, if you please, as that particular encounter. I remember for all of my life the moment I first met Sue for the first time, and my sister had arranged this. This is an arranged marriage, and my sister really felt compelled to arrange my marriage because she really didn't feel like I was competent enough to do it. And so she was kind of managing my life for a long time, and she still tries to do that. It's nice having an older sister, who still thinks that I'm 7 years old. But nonetheless, she kind of arranged this. And she invites Sue to her house. She invites me to her house. She tells me that Sue is going to be there, and she'd already told me some things about Sue that intrigued me as I was listening to her description of her. And so the doorbell rings. I am downstairs, and the main level is a few steps upward. And so I heard the doorbell ring, and I walked upstairs, and there was Sue. And I can remember what she was wearing. I can tell you what she looked like. She had long, dark hair, black hair, braces on her teeth. She sparkled when she smiled. She was intriguing. She was witty. She was smart. And just something like, whoa, I mean, like something's happening, and I'm not really sure that I understand. And it didn't happen immediately, but, by the end of the day, in our time together, I was really very, very intrigued with her and quite captivated by this incredibly beautiful lady, who essentially seemed to indicate that she thought I might be interesting too, which was really kind of cool. So anyway, we have that exposure opportunity. So the first thing on the the relational continuum is this, okay? Where here's the continuum. It starts here, it goes here, and right about here, that little diamond means this is the place where that person made a lifetime commitment to you. In other words, she said, for better, for worse, in sickness and in health until death do us part. Now that's pretty significant. And if you're thinking about donors, and of course this discussion is not only relevant to that relationship, but a whole lot of other relationships as well. But if you're thinking about donors, this doesn't mean that that's their first gift, okay? Don't think of it that way. This is a donor, who may have made, or an individual who may have made contributions to your organization all along the way. But somewhere along the way, they made a commitment and said, this is an organization that I'm going to support for the rest of my life. In other words, I love this organization. I love what it is they're doing. I know that they're not perfect, but I love the people that are involved. And something, I'm going to be a part of this organization, by God's grace until I die. And Sue and I have two organizations like that essentially, we're just going to continue to support for the rest of our life. And we support a couple of other things, but we have a few darlings that are very, very important to us, and they're very, very important to the things that are important to us. So anyway, so here you have Sue. Here's lovely Sue. Long dark hair, okay. And here's Jerry. And this is before I ever knew she existed. And I grew up in Maine, far away from Wisconsin, where Sue was born and lived. My father was a lobsterman. Her father was a tool and die maker at American Motors, making automobiles. My dad was a Baptist. Her dad was a Catholic. My dad was something other than a Polish person, and my wife was Polish. Dubinsky, that's a good Polish name, and her father was Russian. So, I mean, there's a lot of differences here, okay? And so here we are. We meet one another for the first time, not knowing that each other existed. And so the first thing that you need to know in terms of the relational continuum is that this is what I call the exposure opportunity. In other words, there are things that you do in your organization that bring people to you or to a place where they hear about you or they see something about you, but it's the first time they've been exposed to you. Now, you might have a YouTube video that's very, very powerful, that kind of tells your story in a short, concise way, and people, kind of go there, and that may be their first exposure to your organization. So it doesn't have to be like a personal setup. It can be something that's done virtually, and there's more of that being done today than ever before just because of the way that people are communicating. But there are things that happen that bring people to a point that basically they're exposed to what it is that you do. And what you need to do is again, homework assignment. Okay, what I'd like you to think about tonight is what kinds of things do you do already that bring people into that setting that never have heard from you before. Now, they're going to hear about you formally and informally. You're going to have some of your constituents, some of your happy people that basically are a part of your ministry. Many of those people are going to tell their friends about you. And so they're going to hear about you that way. But there's all kinds of ways that people are exposed to you, and you need to know what they are, and then imagine some new ones that might be effective in just introducing people to what it is that you do. You don't have to tell them everything that you do. That's one of the big mistakes that we make, is that we feel like we have to tell them everything, that they need to know everything. The realities are you didn't know everything about the person that you eventually married, but there was enough interest there that you had something to work and to build upon. So this is really, really important. Now, up the top here, I just want to make sure that we have this here. This is emotion, and this is rational. Remember, it's emotion that brings us together. It's rationalism that keeps us together. The thing that you want to see here in this diagram is this, and that is that rationalism doesn't displace emotion. But the longer you go in the relationship, the deeper the relationship becomes, because it's much more substantive here than it was here. See, the person you fell in love with here, that's about as much as you knew about her or him. Now, after 20 or 30 years or 40 years of marriage, it's the depth of the relationship is much deeper because you've gone through so many things together, and now the relationship is deeper. Is the emotion still there? Absolutely. So rationalism doesn't displace emotion, it only makes it to grow deeper. Now, the next thing that happened, so these little diamonds represent little spaces of opportunity. The second one is the first date. Now, the first date, just kind of keep it, we're just using the dating analogy now and the falling in love analogy, but the first date, you're just kind of, talking about yourself. The pronouns, I, let me tell you about me. And so we're sitting there having a meal, and she's asking me questions, and I'm trying to explain who I am. And I'm trying to impress her, so I'm trying to say, I'm a really great guy, I'm an athlete, and I'm strong. and and I don't kick dogs, and I've been nice to my mother all my life, but all those kinds of things that you would hope, or she would hope, might want to hear, and I'm trying to convince her that I really am a take. This is, you don't want to miss this train, because this is a train that's going somewhere, and I tell you, I'd love for you to be on my train. I mean, but essentially, I never did say that, by the way, so don't give up on me too badly. But the point is that we do those kinds of things. I mean, we're just trying to convince her or him that we're worthy of it. Now, Sue was doing the same things, but she's so much more subtle, as most of you lovely ladies are. She, wants to keep everybody guessing. She just kind of says enough to keep you intrigued, but leaves you hanging a little bit so that you're curious. And I don't know how you guys do that, but you really are pretty good at it for the most part. Sue is just a master. And so she's kind of reminding me that she's, did you go to college? Yeah. You have any degrees? Yeah. How many? 5. Oh, really? And, what's the greatest one? Well, I have a doctorate and I'm working on a postdoc. And I think, what in the world is this woman? I mean, I'm like, but she's kind of convincing or trying to convince me that she's probably worthy of my consideration as well. So the first date, exploratory. I mean, is this somebody that I want to have a second date with? And sometimes you have a second date. So this is a second date. And the second date is a little bit more specific. We're kind of developing ideas that kind of emerged out of the first conversation, and things that questions that arose in the absence, of one another and so forth. And so the second date, becomes a little bit more detailed, not very detailed. I mean, we're not talking about our greatest fears or, our strongest emotions or whatever the case might be, but we're kind of just learning a little bit more about one another. And then after that, there are just a whole lot of other things that happen, aren't there? I mean, I meet her parents, I meet her friends, she meets my parents, she meets my friends. We have, all kinds of dates where we're sitting here talking to people, we're growing and so forth. And so you're all familiar with that. But let me just say this, first of all, that this needs to happen, the time between exposure to the second date needs to happen relatively quickly. I mean, like within 3 or 4 days if possible. I mean, really, in a week or so at the most. And the reason for that is that emotion is so fleeting, and that's one of the characteristics of emotion, isn't it? That you can really feel something, emotionally strong at one moment, and then you walk out and you kind of forget what it is that you felt so strong about. So people can come and hear about your organization and really be passionately moved by it. And then, something else comes up the next day that takes away their attention from what it is that they experienced just the day before, and they've kind of lost a little bit of that fervor. And so, in an eager relationship, after I met Sue, I wanted to meet with her as soon as I possibly could. And so I said, well, I'm going to be free on Friday. I've got a ticket to a ball game. Would you love to go? I'd like to go. And she says, yes. And I'm like really excited. But how do you replicate that in the terms of, your organization? One way to do it, and we're going to be talking a little bit more about this concept a little bit later, is to, if in the exposure opportunity, to suggest some things that they might want to take a look at. We have some materials over here. If you're interested at all in what it is we're doing, we'd like you to take a look at them. If you talk to them on an individual basis, so glad that you're here. Would just love to get to know you a little better. Any chance for, coffee, at 10 o'clock, or meeting down at the local coffee shop or whatever. I mean, there are all kinds of things that you could do. That first date is really pretty important. We're going to have a little bit of a special event at the organization. It's just an open house, and we do them, every month or something of that nature, where people can come in and kind of see what it is we do and experience it on a little bit of a different basis. Love to have to come one of those. But those are kinds of things that would allow people to take the opportunity of being able to explore, because the first date is really exploration, to explore whether or not this is something they really have an interest in. So how can you provide that opportunity? And it may be that you have a video or something that they can go and watch and say, well, you might want to take a look at this. It's on their website, and give them the link, the URL to their website. And after you get that, if you really have an interest, would you just give me a call? I'd like to get your impressions from that, because we're always constantly trying to, improve it. Just use your creative skills to try to figure out how can we, keep that ball rolling, keep it moving down the field for people who really want it to go down the field. Now, the second date is really a whole lot easier because now you can, after that exploratory session, you have a little bit more ground to walk on than you did before. And so, and we'll talk about, the things that you could do then. It's part of another discussion that we'll be involved in just a little bit later. So, but the thing that I want you to remember is that there's one very significant time thing that happens in this relationship, and it happens right about here. And, in the falling in love analogy, it's what I call the hypothetical conversation. You've been dating, for maybe 2 or 3 weeks or 2 or 3 months or whatever the case might be, but it's clear that you have feelings for one another. You're kind of imagining that maybe this could be the person that I want to spend the rest of my life with, and you maybe have even touched upon that conversation, lightly, but not necessarily very specifically because you don't want to scare anybody away, but yet you're still thinking about it. And so you can ask all kinds of questions to determine whether or not she's thinking about it or he's thinking about it too. But anyway, there was a point in time, and it's true with all of us, that we have this hypothetical conversation. And it goes something like this. You're sitting together and you're getting really nervous about it, and I'm looking at Sue, and I said, well, Sue, I think maybe it might be good to have a conversation. Well, I think it really probably would be a good idea if we, did I say we? What really, Sue, what, if we were to get together, and it takes so much difficulty to get that we word out, but if we were to get together, and then, where would we live? Would we have children? How many children would we have? And all the other kinds of questions that, essentially become a part of that conversation at some point in time. And what's very significant about that, and it's extremely significant about that, okay, are you getting the point? This is like really important stuff, that what happens here that is more significant than you could possibly imagine is that the pronouns change. You see, I and me is the basic message that is being communicated here. You're trying to convince her of something or him for something. But when the pronouns change from we and us, everything changes. Everything changes. Everything changes. Because then people are taking ownership of what it is that you do. Now, there's all kinds of ways to bring a relationship in the world of development to that point. And I'm just going to share with you one, and I'm going to share with you several more a little bit later in this session, but I'm going to just share with you one that all of you can do. If you're a new development director, as some of you are that are in this room, you're just kind of getting started in your profession, and even if you're an old development director like me who's been doing it for a long time, the point is that this is something that you can do that you will feel absolutely, totally, 100% comfortable with. You're not going to agonize over it. You're not going to, push yourself into doing something that's going to be unpleasant. This is like easy, easy, easy. And it's the one thing that most of you never do, and part of the reason why you haven't perhaps achieved the success that you wanted to achieve is because you've never even thought of doing this, and that's asking somebody a question. You see, typically in our profession, we go to people with an agenda. And essentially, we want people to kind of conform to our agenda, adopt it, and support it. But I learned something long, long ago. And that was, it didn't take me very long to learn, that I knew very, very little about this profession. When I started, perhaps I shared this, but I talked to my first boss. I says, what's my job description? He says, well, raise money. Oh. So I'm writing it down like I'm thinking there's more coming, that there's really a detailed explanation, a job description that talks about that. And he says, do you have any other questions? And I says, well, how much? And he says, a lot. Now, go figure. I was a degree in theology and apologetics from seminary, and all of a sudden my job description for my first professional job was raise a lot of money. And I didn't know how to do it, number one, and I didn't know how much a lot was, number two. Now, I'm going to talk about a lot a little bit later on, how much is a lot of money, because I think you can define that. And you must define it if you're going to survive in this environment. Because I thought, $1 million might have been a lot of money, or $2 million might have been a lot of money. But I didn't know how much a lot of money was because nobody ever told me how much a lot of money was. And I thought I was there one time. One time we had a really great year at Grace College and Seminary, and the president actually was so impressed with the things that had been done in the development office that he came down and he brought all of our staff together. We had a little cake, and he was kind of celebrating, and he says, this is the best year we've ever had in the history of our school. We've raised more money than we've ever raised in the history of our school. We've raised a lot of money, and I'm thinking, a lot. And I'm trying to think, how much was a lot? And I'm kind of writing it down because I knew we raised about $3 or $4 million that year, and I guess that's a lot. Until the end of the meeting, when he's walking out, putting his hand on my shoulder, handing me a 3x5 card on the way out with the goal for next year, which was for $7 million. So how much is a lot? Is $4 million a lot? Is $7 million a lot? I don't know, and I didn't know, and I had to find out, and so I'm going to define for you what a lot is next, probably Wednesday when we get to that, and you're going to know what it is, because if you don't know, you're going to be really frustrated. Now, raising money, was the other thing that he told me to do, and I had no idea how to do that, and I was scared to death of it, as some of you might be. I just, that may be some of the things that you're thinking, this is like the hardest thing in the world, and I'm willing to do the job, but that's what I don't want to do because it's uncomfortable. And so I really didn't know either of those things. And so, this is going to sound really weird, and I hope it doesn't sound arrogant at all, because it's the last thing that it is arrogant. But I have really built a career around pleading ignorance. Now, I know that sounds really silly and stupid at one level, but let me just explain what I mean. I didn't know anything, and there's still so much that I don't know. And I would call people that I knew, people that were friends, people that I knew a whole lot more than, I just started going to my friends, and I'm saying to my friends, and it's developed into a very sophisticated process now. I mean, actually, we do a lot of things that are built upon what it is that I started doing early on in my career. But I would just go to my friends, and I says, this is what I've been asked to do. This is the objectives that I have. This is what it is that I need to get done. If you were in my place, how would you do it? What would you do? And then I would just take out a legal pad and I'd start writing down. And they would tell me exactly what it is that I should do. And some of those things really made a lot of sense to me. I says, well, I'm going to do that. And then I started doing that. And then I would go to other people and I would ask them questions. I think one of the big mistakes that we make in life is we don't ask people questions. I think that's one of the biggest mistakes that we make in our relationship with God. Is rarely do we really ask God a question. When is the last time you really asked God a serious question about, should I do this? Should I not do this? Is this something that you want me to do? I mean, typically we just kind of go with our agenda and say, Lord, bless our agenda. If you'd rubber stamp it, that'd be really cool, because now I can be assured of the fact that you're in it and not me. But the realities are, I just discovered a long time ago, well, actually not all that long ago, that I wasn't asking God questions, and so I started praying differently. And this is kind of a little aside, but I just think it was very, very impactful in my life. I started praying differently about 5 or 6 years ago. And the way I changed the way I prayed was I tried to pray every request, every petition that I was making before the Lord in the form of a question. And so rather than just pray for my wife, I stop and think about it. My wife told me, a long time ago, she's a psychologist now, and one of the things that she told me when we first got married and she was practicing, she was very actively involved in the practice, and came to the breakfast table one morning, she looked at me, and she says, do you know what the psychological disorder of our generation is? Like I'm really supposed to know the answer to that? I says, well, Sue, I really don't. And she says, it's narcissism. Narcissism, it was the predominant thing that they're dealing with when people come in for psychological help, and narcissism is the person who thinks that the world revolves around them, that everything in the world revolves around them, that they're the center of the universe, and they're the most important person in the world, and you kind of sense it, you see it with people, don't you, that they're just kind of this arrogant way about them, that they're just like the most important person ever, and she says, that's what we're dealing with. Well, that was a long, long time ago that she said that, but I never forgot it. And one day I'm writing down a list of prayer requests, all the things that I'm praying for. And I wrote, it was just a little exercise that I thought might be interesting to do. And so I had this long prayer list of things that I was praying for during the context of a couple of days. And I put it on the side of my desk, and then I'm kind of working away, and I kind of look at it, and I'm kind of working away, and I kind of look at it. And finally I looked at it, and something just hit me, and I said, that is the most narcissistic prayer list that I've ever seen. It was like the Spirit of God just thrust a spear in my soul. And you say, well, what do you mean it was the most narcissistic prayer list that you've ever seen? Well, let me tell you what was on the list. Right at the top of the list, I prayed for my wife. And my prayer would be something like this: bless my wife, Sue. Now, if you stop and think about why am I asking the Lord to bless my wife, Sue? Well, one of the things that I figured out, I'm not the brightest, or sharpest pencil in the box, but one of the things that I had figured out, that it's easier to live with a blessed wife than a grumpy one. I just figured that out all on my own, that it's easier to live with a blessed one than a grumpy one. And I'm thinking, I'm asking the Lord to bless my wife because it's best that she be blessed from me. Do you see the point that it's all about me? It's that if she's not blessed, then I'm not blessed, and then life doesn't seem quite the same. And I would ask the Lord to bless my kids. Now, when you stop and get right down to the nitty-gritty of it, why would I ask the Lord to bless my children? Is because, quite frankly, I don't want to have to deal with their garbage, because it keeps me from doing what it is that I want to do. Now, I'm confessing that, and maybe you've never had those thoughts, and so if you never have, please, accept me for... But I had to deal with that. And I just had to ask the Lord to forgive me, because I thought my prayer life was very, very self-centered. And so I remember walking into the kitchen, when that revelation occurred to me in my office, and she was standing there. I said, honey, when's the last time you asked God a question? And her response, initially was, well, you mean other than, a frustration question, like, why did God do this? Why did this happen, and so forth. And we've all asked God those questions, and sometimes it's in a level of frustration, sometimes it's in anger, because we can't understand it. And I'm not sure that God resents that at all. But she says, that's kind of like about it, I guess. And we talked a lot about it, and then we began praying together. And we'd ask God questions in relationship to what is it that He wanted us to do, because we don't want to make a mistake. We just really want to do what You want us to do. And then we started listening. I don't want to go too far in this, but basically, the one thing I can tell you that I've discovered over the course of the last several years since we've done this is that I've discovered that God's voice sometimes sounds like yours. Sometimes it sounds like Sue's. Sometimes it sounds like my pastor's. Sometimes it sounds like my closest friend who calls me out of the blue, without any agenda whatsoever, and says, I don't know, God laid you on my heart today, and this is what I feel like I need to tell you. And all of a sudden, I'm sitting there with tears running down my eyes, because that was the same thing I talked about just that morning. That, Lord, I just need some clarification on this. And here's a friend that calls out of the blue that I haven't talked to in 6 months that tells me, this is what the Lord laid on his heart to tell me this morning. And I'm thinking, that's exactly, And so my life has become much more vital, just because I have learned to ask God questions. And my development professional life has become much more vital, because I have sat down with our clients one after another and have just said, let's talk about this. Can you help me to understand? What's your perspectives on this, and so forth? And they become partners. Remember what I told you yesterday, that what we need more than donors is partners, because when we have partners, those partners will always become donors. But donors rarely become partners for reasons that are very, very self-explanatory, and we talked about that yesterday. So the thing is, you need to figure out, ways in which you can do this to move the conversation from just I and me to we, engaging them in the conversation, seeking their counsel, seeking their advice, seeking their input. Listening to what it is they have to say, responding to what it is they have to say. You don't have to do everything that they have to say, but the realities are you're engaging them. And when they change the pronoun from, well, we could help you with this, or us, I think this is something that we could do together, then all of a sudden, or I can help you do this, or I can help you do this, all of a sudden they've taken ownership of the relationship, and at that point in time, everything changes. Well, then we come to this point. This is the commitment time. Sue and I say yes, and then something else happens right here, and that is what happens after that commitment. In marriage, sometimes it goes this way. Sue goes now through life as a married woman, and I go through life as a married man, and we drift apart, and sometimes along the way it just doesn't seem to be as vibrant as it once was. And sometimes, you know, in many relationships, as I believe it's happened in us, and sometimes we've kind of bopped around this a little bit, but the realities are God's goal is that we live in harmony with one another as one in the centrality of the Lord Jesus Christ in our lives. But that doesn't happen, you know, just because we're married, as most of you would admit and know who have been married. And so we talked a little bit about this yesterday, and we're going to take our break, and then we'll come back and kind of just fill in the blanks for you. But we talked a little bit yesterday about manipulation, that word manipulation, which is kind of a scary word, and it's one that we don't like to hear, especially when it's applied to us in conjunction with something that we're doing from a ministry standpoint. And so I can give you all kinds of reasons, you know, why, you know, that might not be a good idea, and I can tell you, you know, manipulation is not something that, you know, is good, and you would all agree with me, but I think there's one sure way of defining whether or not you've been manipulative or not. And that is that if you don't put as much energy into this as you did this, you probably have been manipulative. You see, we put a lot of energy in getting people to the altar, getting people to the point of commitment where they believe in what it is that we're going to do. And as soon as they make that commitment, we don't ignore them, but we don't necessarily give them the same level of attention that we gave them over here. You see, during this era of time, there was nothing that was too much. I mean, Sue could have said, would you please walk over those hot set of coals in your bare feet? And I'd say, well, how far do you want me to go? I mean, it wasn't like I was going to debate it. I said, of course I would do that. And I would do a whole lot of other things for her. But if she were to say that now, I said, what are you thinking about, girl? I mean, I'm not going to walk across this set of coals. I mean, the point is that we put a lot of energy into this, but we don't put much energy into this. And oftentimes, this represents 2 steps in the developmental process. You see, there are some people that are really good at doing this, I think, from an organizational standpoint. And if you've got somebody that really kind of knows how to walk people through this process, you get a team of people that really are good at that, and, you know, that's okay. I don't have a real problem with that because I do understand the diversity of giftedness. But you still have to create an organizational infrastructure over here that basically you know carries that relationship forward. People who are basically committed to just serving, you know, people that serve you. Having an organizational infrastructure that basically assures that no one that has supported you is going to fall through the cracks, that we're going to engage them and we're going to continue to engage them, you know, the entire time that they're a part of our relationship. And so just keep in mind, if you really want to understand manipulation, ask yourself the question, do we spend as much time over here as we did here? And unfortunately, in most development directors that I talk to, and I've talked to literally tens of thousands of them, the realities are, probably the statistic is, well, we spend about 90% here and we spend about 10% here. And you know, you just need to sit on that and kind of hold that thought, because if that, in fact, percentage is reflective of where you might be as an organization, then now you're beginning to see some of the things that you really need to focus your attention on.